So again, we're going to kick off the next afternoon panel titled Assembling the Force from Acquisition Operations. When we first started building up the Space Force, one of the things General Saltzman talked about this, about a list that I had. And the list was things that an independent service had to do. And if it didn't do it, then it really wasn't an independent service. One of the things that I felt was critical that we do was design the force, both the on-orbit force structure design, but also the organizational design. And the organizational design that we wanted to embrace was a flat organization that could move at speed across all the disciplines that we brought into the Space Force, whether it's acquisition, operations, intelligence, cyber, or engineering. And as I looked around, when I was, as a member of the Joint Chiefs in the tank, and I looked around at my other service chief partners, I thought I was lucky and that I had this incredible industry that was really, in a terrible word to use in the space business, exploding. From the primes all the way down to non-traditional types of partners. And so as we work to build this service, we work to be able to move at speed, to capitalize on the critical capabilities that we're in industry, and again to be able to do so across all the different functional areas that we brought into the service. Couldn't be happier with the panel that we have today. I will tell you, I'll never forget the day I called Frank Calvelli and said, "Please come help." I think you had just started a job like a week before I called, and I really appreciate you answering the call. But Mandy Vaughn, who is here, a legend in our business, she's going to lead this panel. And Mandy, over to you, and thanks.
Awesome, thank you, sir. And I'm reminiscing about a time at Schriever War Games years ago when I was briefing the move early in the War Games from the commercial cell, and I briefed General Raymond, and he was in uniform, of course, and I'm representing the commercial sector very well. I was in a hoodie and Chaco sandals, so I'm loving the footwear today. This is awesome.
I'll tell you, the commercial, out of that war game that you helped us mature, the commercial thought, when I went back, in that war game I played myself, and then I went back home to my real job, and something was going on in the domain that a commercial cell would have been really helpful for. And I reached out to my team and said, "Hey, where's the commercial folks?" Well, they obviously don't exist. Well, from that, we stood up the commercial integration cell. So thanks for all your
And I think that was the first tweet sent in a Schriever War Games. Yeah.
You got it.
Thanks, sir. No, thank you, Carrie, and the CSIS team. This is just a really fascinating way to reflect on what we've done for 5 years, and thank you very much for the opportunity. And I'm just honored to be here with this panel and really looking forward to the discussion. But you're all pros, you all know the drill. We're just gonna dive in. You don't need rules of engagement. But I think it's a core part of as the general was mentioning, is part of the Space Force's purpose is to acquire and present the forces that operate into, from, and through space. It's obvious that a lot of this was done to address the reality that space has been, but is, a warfighting domain, and how do we start to normalize that behavior and that buying power to go with it. But then also, how do we really move from that initial set to how is it integrating with the joint force? How is it working? What's not working? What do we want to do for the next 5 years? And that we're going to explore that acquisition to operations, those two bookends. And it's nice to dovetail this with that last panel on partnerships, and also in terms of how do the partnerships also feed into this. So again, thank you very much for joining. So first, for the opening remarks, then I've got some prepared questions, and you know the drill. You've got the QR code, I've got the iPad, so if you've got questions, please fire away, and I'll try to make time for as many of those as we can. But I guess we have, starting with Mr. Lightfoot from Lockheed Martin. You have the floor first.
Well, thank you. It's great to be here. I've already had kind of my opening remarks for those of you who were here earlier this morning at 9 o'clock when we kicked this off. But what a great day. This has been really exciting. It's been interesting to hear the different perspectives of how we got Space Force. It is kind of hard to believe we're at 5 years. And I think what's been interesting, some of the threads that I've been picking up on, we'll talk about as we go through the questions, but the last situation, Allied by Design, we talk all the time with our international partners. As an industry partner, we talk with the international partners all the time about what can we do for you, and then what can we do here, and then those classification challenges come up, things like that. We also have had to adjust to different acquisition models. And what I like to tell people is the cool thing for us about working with Frank or Secretary Calvelli, sorry. I've known Frank a long time. about working together for so long is it's really not what we're buying, it's how we buy it. And I think that's a really important discriminator between maybe the difference of 20 years ago and what we're doing now. We are going a lot less cost plus, but we're still doing some cost plus. And so an organization like Lockheed, we're building the bespoke system still, right? That you've got to build, they've got to work. He rides me unmercifully about one in particular that we're still on schedule. Knock on wood for that one as we move forward. But we're also getting to work with people like Derek. And what I'm seeing as we go through that is the way that it's not just the way the industry responds, it's the way the customer responds. Derek has shown us that you can go fast, and he's flexible as opposed to the rigidness. The rigidness is what drives us to follow the process ridiculously, and that slows us down, right? And I think sometimes because of the historical nature of that, I won't call it a lack of a partnership, a lack of kind of the put and take, you're going to follow the process to ensure you're right. And so what happens to us is the process becomes the product. And we forget we're supposed to deliver these things. And so I love the way we've been able to adjust to both ends of that spectrum, whether it's the bespoke large systems that we build or whether we've been able to work with Derek. I mean, if you go back in 2019, I think when SDA, or the first salvos of SDA, it was, we don't want any primes. Right? We want this to be the new entrants and bring all those folks in. There's a lot of primes in there, right? Because we've had to adapt as well. And he's driven us to adapt. And then the acquisition tenants that Frank's put in are driving us to adapt as well. So industry's having to adapt just like everybody else is, but it's all for the good because we got to go faster. I mean, these guys tell me speed, resiliency, and maturity of the technology. And so internal to Lockheed, we're doing some things to actually advance that tech maturity on our own nickel before we bring it in. And that way, hopefully, we can get to the warfighter faster than in the past. So yeah, excited to be here and look forward to the questions.
Thank you. And next we've got Tony Frazier from LeoLabs.
Thanks, Mandy. It's really great to be here and reflect on where we've been and then talk about where we can go in the future. And so a couple things that I think are maybe important just to kick off the discussion. The last few weeks we talked about how we've seen each other, in various forums, from the Reagan National Defense Forum, to the Space Power event last week in Orlando, and then here, celebrating the 5th year birthday, for the Space Force. And I think some of the common themes that I've heard is one is that the threat's real. We're seeing that kind of increased threats from Russia, China, kind of various other actors, and we need to be able to respond to that. And that's really created a sense of urgency, where speed is what we're really trying to optimize around. It was really interesting being at Reagan, and seeing that Palantir was the diamond sponsor. There were a number of kind of startup companies, LeoLabs included, that were part of the dialogue, looking at how we can bring innovation, to the mission. And I think the third theme is really around space and the importance of space. And so whether it's companies that kind of live in this mission day to day, or others that are thinking about how this fits in with combined JADC2 architectures, we play a really critical role in supporting the mission. And so it's really fun to be at a company like LeoLabs, where we're a small group focused on a big mission, and having an ability to focus on ways that we can safeguard our way of life on Earth, by building a living map of activity, in space. And so, a lot of our focus day to day is thinking about, with military space commands and civil space agencies and commercial space operators, is how do we really increase the pace of innovation to help them be able to detect, track, and characterize threats, and then be in a position to respond, to those. And I think the business models are really adapting, to that. Companies in the past, we would be focused on kind of large bespoke systems, but now I think there is a real strong appetite to, bring new innovators in, get them close to the mission to understand, how to drive their investments, and then deliver, capabilities that, that can be impactful on really fast timelines.
General Schiess, thank you for also schlepping from California
Oh,
this
it's all
way
good. Thanks,
yesterday.
Mandy.
So
I want to say thanks to CSIS for having us and Carrie Bingen. So Carrie and I have a history. When I was a young, I think we were both young, right, back then? When I was a legislative liaison, Carrie was on the HASC, and so we did some traveling and some work, and so appreciate that. And then, listening to the first panel this morning, having been the Undersecretary's senior military assistant when we were thinking about the Space Force, and as I think you heard, maybe the Air Force wasn't completely on board, and so it was that one interesting part, being a space operator in some of those discussions. And so, but thanks for having us, and thanks for allowing me to do that. I've got my battle buddies here from industry, and Honorable Calvelli here too. But you heard General Saltzman talk about Space Force components, and when we first stood up, we actually took Space Operations Command. And we gave it too much to do. It was not only the organized, train, and equip command and getting forces ready, but they also were the service component to U.S. Space Command. And as we realized, we looked at, the other services also stood up service components to Space Command, and they had more bandwidth than maybe poor General Whiting did as commander of SPOC. And so we made a decision, and it was about a year ago now that we celebrated our first birthday, to separate that, which allows Rock Miller to focus on generating, presenting, and sustaining forces for all the combatant commands, but primarily for U.S. Space Command. And so out of Vandenberg, U.S. Space Forces Space, we jokingly say we have so much space going on, we got space in our name twice. So S4S is out there. And we are the component to U.S. Space Command. And so all the presented forces that come from SPOC, we execute those operations on a daily basis. General Whiting, in his role as the commander of U.S. Space Command, has also conferred joint responsibilities onto me. So you heard General Saltzman was the DC FAC, and so for those in the air world, you know what that means. And so on the space world, I am the Combined Joint Force Space Component Commander for General Whiting, which means he wants me to execute those operations across his AOR and to bring in the joint forces. And I know we're going to talk a little bit more about that. So we can have tactical control of other services forces that are working in, so that we are synchronized together. We do that through 2 combat deltas. One is out at Vandenberg with us, Combat Delta 1-5 or Delta 5. And they do operations, the C in the combine there. So my good buddy Goddard's over there. That's where we really do a lot of our coalition work. And I jokingly, but it happened the other night, so I'll say it again. In the middle of the night when I get a call, sometimes I have to really wake up because there might be an accent from an Australian or a Brit on the phone, and I've got to get that together, because that's how we are combined there. And then we have Combat Delta 1-15 or Delta 15 out at the National Space Defense Center, and I think Alec was talking about that. And we would have showed her the floor, but we had a lot to talk to when she was there. But they do the protect and defend mission out there with our intelligence community partners out there together to do that. And we do that through some other joint centers, the Missile Warning Center at Cheyenne Mountain, the Joint OPIR Center at Buckley, and the Joint Navigation Warfare Center down in Albuquerque. But that is the force that is ready to fight, as I like to say, that there are thousands of Guardians that go into operation centers every day, so that the People's Republic of China, Russian Federation, or anybody that wants to take on the United States says, not today, because the Guardians are out there doing their job. So thanks.
thank you for coming. And Honorable Calvelli.
So when I came on board, it's almost more than 2.5 years now, which is hard to believe. I came in my head with 3 priorities. 1 was speed, 2 was resiliency, and 3 was integration. Speed and acquisition to get capabilities to the warfighter faster. Resiliency, adding that to the architecture to make sure that space can be counted on during times of crisis, conflict, or any time at all for the country and for the joint force. And then 3, integration, right? Integration within space itself to make sure all the components come together and form the puzzle that space needs to provide. And then integration with other domains like air and ground and sea to make sure that space is that key joint enabler and force multiplier for the joint force. And we've stuck true to those 3 priorities. The other thing when I came on board is I think I told the Hills, like within the first couple of weeks, I had a hearing that I wasn't planning any reorgs. And I'm not a big reorg fan. I think in most cases they're somewhat worthless. But so I have kept Space RCO, Space Systems Command, and Space Development Agency, all as separate entities, each with clear roles and responsibilities, and in some cases, some of those folks have different authorities. And I've used that to my advantage and managed the organization as an integrated portfolio of programs across the board, across 8 different PEOs across those 3 organizations. And I'm very happy that I was able to keep that commitment to not doing any kind of major restructure changes.
Thank you for joining us. So I'll pose the first question to you, since I'm an acquisition nerd from my days too. But as we heard this morning, and clearly a significant part of the Space Force's origin story was about streamlining and improving and trying to consolidate space acquisition in the process. Your position was created as a main part of that story. You came into the job and established your acquisition tenets. So I have to start by asking, what worked with your model? If you knew then what you know now, what would you try to do differently?
So I will tell you, I would triple down on my model. I wouldn't change a single tenet. The most important ones to me are tenet 1 and 9. One is build smaller. We know for a fact, and I know this from my experience at the NRO, my experience in the Space Force, that when you build smaller, you can go faster. Derek and team are proving that out now. SSC's proven that out as well with things they're doing with TAC-RS. When you build smaller, you go faster, and that's really key. And when you build smaller and you go faster, you refresh technology a lot faster. I mean, when we build these bigger class of satellites like AHF or space-based infrared for missile warning, I mean, we're refreshing technology every 20 to 25 years. As Derek starts turning tranches, he's refreshing technology every 2 to 3 years. That is a dramatic improvement in taking advantage of space. The other tenet I love from a speed perspective is tenet 9, which is execute, right? It's deliver your programs on cost and schedule. The Department of Defense, in particular the Space Force, loses so much time by overrunning programs in terms of schedule and delivering stuff late. That has got to change. That has got to stop. We have got to establish a culture of delivering programs on schedule, on cost, and that work. And when we do that, we add the element of speed as well. So tenets 1 and 9, but I wouldn't change a thing.
What about the industry perspective on the same, kind of the acquisition tenets from your view?
I mean, so one of the things I would just share is it's been great to see how we can take programs like the Small Business Innovative Research program and use that to combine private investment with some government funding to be able to do rapid innovation. And not just build a prototype, but look at how that then can be integrated, into a broader architecture. We recently had we announced our new radar site in Arizona. It's our 7th site, 11th radar we've added to the network, and so we were able to work closely with the Space Force. It was contracted through AFRL to be able to go from literally a PowerPoint, to breaking ground. To 5 months later, having an operational radar tracking 10,000 objects in space, and even at the event last week, Space Power, getting a chance to sit down with both the PEOs, so Colonel McLean, and PEO SDA Combat Power, but also I know the SDA Net award that Andrel received out of RCO. Industry starting to talk together about how do we get our capabilities deeply integrated in the architecture. And so definitely applaud the appetite, not just to kind of create early RDT&E, but to get it transitioned into operations, and to be able to do that in a year time frame, I think is pretty incredible.
Yeah, I think from my perspective, as I said earlier, it's not necessarily what you're buying, it's how you're buying it.
Yeah.
And what I appreciate the most about the model, it's pretty clear, crystal clear, I think, as to quote a few good men, crystal clear to us in industry. But the difference is that from my model is if you come in and ask for firm fixed price development, you're basically asking industry to take more risk than they have in the past, right? But you can do that and keep all the same stuff in there. And that's just not going to work. And I think Frank and his team have been really good about recognizing what they're asking for and not been overbearing. We've had some, don't get me wrong, it's not perfect. We've had some places where everybody wants the same thing from cost plus when they ask for firm fixed price development. We're having to adjust on the industry side. And one of the neater things about that is that's allowed us some flexibility to go maybe be more horizontally integrated than vertically integrated. Like I will go grab new entrants. I'll go grab folks to come in that have tech that's already ready, to your point about speed. Let's use their tech. Now, can my team do that? Of course they could, if they had time. But why not go grab what somebody else has already invested in and do that? So that's the other thing they've encouraged is these partnerships to don't just try to do it all yourself. Go see who else has been invested in and making those investments going forward. So we've been pretty successful there, and that's how one of the ways we've been successful with Derek and Space Development Agency. But I think the tenets are clear. I think I would say the expectation is clear too in terms of consequences. I mean, they put their money where their mouth is. When things are not going well, you've canceled them. You know, we get accused of not ever canceling programs. He has.
Good point. So I'm just going to go to the other bookend for a moment, and then we'll kind of meet back in the middle. So regarding presentation of forces, the colloquial take on previous integration of space capabilities into the joint force was space was special. Space was insular. Space was, of course, highly classified. So what have you done in your new role to really ingrain yourself into the joint force? And then how does that circle back to his job in terms of then what does he acquire?
Right. No, that's a great question. I think part of that started before the Space Force, and actually U.S. Space Forces Central had a chart at their. We were all at another conference last week, but at their booth they had it was all the space operators that had deployed forward into Central Command and had done that job. So for me personally, growing up doing space operations, mostly within the United States and working, maybe a little bit with STRATCOM or and then your joint job was maybe in the Pentagon or something. Having that experience in a theater, albeit a different kind of war, but to see how a combatant command operates, how we fight jointly. So interestingly, General Saltzman, I think he said this in a different conference last week. We make this argument and he may have said it a little bit today, we make this argument that services organize, train, and equip, and combatant commands fight, which is the true statement, and that combatant commanders are the ones that are given the authority to actually fight, but they actually fight through service components. And so those are service entities that are given to the combatant command. And so from our perspective at S4S, having been conferred the joint responsibilities as the joint component to bring all that together. One of the things that we did was we said, hey, we have to have a service plan to the COCOM's operational plan. We had never done that in Air Force Space Command or even 14th Air Force or JFCC Space in the past. We were so focused on delivering capabilities to the world and the warfighter, we never did hey, what would our plan be if we actually executed an operational plan? That doesn't mean Strategic Command didn't have one. We just didn't have a service component one. And so that's what we did. That's one of the first things that we did at S4S. The work had started before that, is we needed a service plan. And that has now become, because we have these joint responsibilities and we bring in the other service components, it's called the JSOP, the Joint Space Operations Plan. And so we work through that. It is the service component and joint component plan to U.S. Space Command, but it is focused on a terrestrial AOR and their O plan. I can't say which one that is, but we'll continue to work through that, and we're working with the other services. I think someone earlier said, Admiral Paparo, the commander of U.S. Indo-Pacific Command, has said he cannot be on plan for any of the fights in the Indo-PACOM area if space is not on plan. And so we're interacting with them. We now have a service component out there under General Mastelier. So I think bringing that all together to be able to do that. General Whiting has given me Space Operations Control Authority. If you're an airman, you know what Air Control Authority is and who has that. And so what that means, pretty hard to do actually in the space, because there's a lot of people out there that fly stuff in space. And so to say, hey, I've got control over that is pretty, we're at the little stages there to say that. But then we can put out space control order, which we have, and measures that we can then say to others, hey, if you're going to operate in the U.S. Space Command AOR, here's your left and right limits till we get into a conflict, and then we can execute those. Getting back to how that goes back to acquisition is Honorable Calvelli and his folks and the Space Force staff can take that JSOP, and it's I just briefed it to the Secretary of the Air Force a few weeks ago. It has gaps. There are things that I can't do. I can't close in there. And so he can take those from an operational plan and say, especially when we go to Congress or others, and say, here's our gaps in our plan. If, no kidding, we had to go to war today in the Indo-Pacific that we cannot close. And so I think that is how we do that. When we actually write down how we would do it with different, branches and sequels of how we do that, then we can pass that off to the requirement folks and to the acquirers that, hey, here's our plan, and we're not there yet. These are the things that we need to be able to get in. And then General Whiting and his role as the combatant commander, he gets to put an IPL forward every year. And I'll tell you what, it's pretty great when you're, I have 2 4-star bosses. I love that. I mean, if I could have a third, that would be great. But it's great when my 2 4-star bosses are aligned. And so the CSO is saying the same things. He's saying, I need space superiority and space domain awareness. I've got my combatant commander saying, I need space fires. And I need battle space characterization and space domain awareness. And so we're giving that information over to the acquirers in the industry. And so I think that's where we come into that place.
Anything you want to add from the acquisition side?
No, I think Doug nailed it, and understanding sort of what those gaps are is critical for us, so that we and the CISRO folks can go off and write the requirements and go acquire what Doug needs to go do his job.
So just to kind of pull that thread a little more, so that framework that you just outlined, but then coupling, I'll start with you, Robert, on this one, just because of then the changing nature that then drives into acquisition and technical innovation, right? So we've seen in innovation talk, you see that the major hubs of R&D have moved around. It's way more on the private side. It's not necessarily DoD funded per se, or even government funded. So how do you see the role of the acquisition entities, whether that be SDA, Space Systems Command, Space RCO, how do you see them changing to work with you as well as the rest of the technical development community? And how do you then leverage that within your process? And what would you want to see improve from the SAE's point of view?
Yeah, well, first of all, the whole concept that General described has driven us to almost change ourselves in terms of how we're thinking about things. And so if you think about what we call the valley of death, right, where some technology gets to TRL 6 and then nobody wants to pay to get over the hump. We created an organization inside of Lockheed Martin called Ignite, and it's really our RCO, our Rapid Capabilities Office. They do all my development. I had to do that for a couple of reasons. First of all, I wanted to get things over that valley of death, but I also wanted to be, if I was going to bid on a fixed price development program, I wanted some confidence that I'm taking that risk. I need to get it over the hump. We would have never thought about those kind of things, right? We would always done those on the edges around major programs that we already had. But we stood them up, made it a standalone org. I joked that they're allowed to run with scissors. They don't have to follow all my command media that I have for all the other things. And sometimes they're falling when they're running with scissors, but that's okay, right? That's what they're supposed to do. But that's the group that's actually looking also across the industry, right? Because there's a what I'll call what we would consider the traditional aerospace and defense industry. And then there's all these other folks that are starting to come in. So we can leverage them to bring their tech into some of the things, or heck, go the other way. There's nothing that says I can't support you, right? I've got scale and legacy mission knowledge. Often the new entrants don't have that. And together that makes a pretty strong comparison, or a pretty strong team to hit that mission. So I think the speed word that Frank and the General talked about have driven us to, we've got to innovate offline, right? In these separate organizations and prove that we can get tech there quicker. It drives me crazy when General Whiting says, I got the kid I've got. That makes me crazy. We're better than that. Yeah. He shouldn't have the kid he's got. He should, for a fight in 26 or 27, we should be able to deliver on that, ahead of that. And so we've been doing that with our tech demo program. We for the first time ever, we built a spacecraft, a payload, and I bought a launch vehicle. And we flew a mission. Others do that. I mean, other new entrants have been doing that. We've never done that from our perspective, and it's something we're doing to try to prove that tech and show that we can advance it and hopefully give him kit maybe that he doesn't have today before he needs it.
Do you see any other muscle movements that are needed to help enable that, like color of money problems, or being able to change between buying a system or a thing versus a service?
Yeah, well, the buying a service is interesting. That's what we I would say some parts of the government seem to know how to buy a service, some don't, right? And there's not a consistency there as we go forward, because I can provide, you can imagine in my world, if I walk in and say I'm gonna build this $200 million satellite and I'm gonna amortize it over 20 years, but with a data stream, and I take that to the acquisition committee and they go, we don't really know how to do that yet, right? But they do it in some areas in pieces, and so it's a mixed bag, I think, in that perspective. But what I do think has been the change, I don't say it needs to change, I think it's already happening, is think about how industry goes in to see these guys and we try to shape them. This is what you need to build. Now we're telling them, I'm making an investment, you shape me. Shape me. Tell me what you want me to invest in so that I can bring that kit to the fight at some point. And that kind of changes the discussion, really. When we've had, and that's what we're having to do, instead of saying, here's what we got, you need to buy it. I'm spending, $400 million a year. Where would you like me to spend it? Where can I best help you from that standpoint?
Yeah, and getting access to that demand signal and just understanding how to kind of apply your capability to mission is invaluable, where you're going through that innovation, process. So, one of the things that was really kind of shaped my point of view on this was, my days at Maxar, and we had our large contract with the NRO, for the electro-optical commercial layer, and then we also supported NGA with an image dissemination platform called GlobalGD. And so we started to actively engage with the end users just to make sure that they were really consuming and using these products. A lot of training and engagement, and it led to a lot of exercise support. And so spent a lot of time down at Fort Liberty supporting General Carilla at the time when he was the 18th Airborne Corps commander, and he was doing leveraging Project Maven system with commercial imagery, to be able to demonstrate, how imagery could be used for more than mapping. It could be used for real tactical, mission planning and operations, and that was incredible. Just in terms of learning for us to figure out, what we need to do to architect our system, not just to collect the right images in space, but to be able to get them on the ground in mission relevant timelines to be able to support, a tactical mission. And we brought the timelines down by 10x, in 9 months, and then ultimately, when things started to escalate in Ukraine with Russian aggression, in the region, then we were ready, to support it. It was a whole new mission set, both for how we supported the U.S., also how we supported various partner nations. And so that experience of allowing innovators, whether they be traditional primes, non-traditionals, to be able to be shoulder to shoulder, with operators, I think that's really essential. And kudos, General Schiess, to you, and kind of with things like the commercial integration cell and the joint commercial operations, cell, like those create conditions where we can get our capabilities in front of users and have that help inform, how we need to innovate.
Can I add one thing real quick?
Sure.
Just an anecdote with a different service, right? We went to see the acquisition official, and they said, you got 1 hour with my operator. And if my operator doesn't like your tool, I know they're going to go, I know right now, no matter how good you think it is, they're going to go back to their old tool. And that's exactly what Tony's talking about. Having that ability to have that interaction, we can build the things that they're going to be most used and most useful to the operator.
Just curious if you have thoughts on any of those bigger muscle movements that you'd like to have.
I love what Roberts and Lockheed are doing in terms of taking IRAD and applying it to a fewer, larger, more complex, real live demonstrations rather than peanut butter spreading it across the whole company. So I encourage other industries and traditional companies in the defense industry to do very similar to what Lockheed's doing, right? Because it's going to give him a leg up in terms of being ready for us. I think when it comes to private and commercial and taking advantage of that, there's a couple things that we need to do better in the government. One is we need to trust better, right? And I think we have to think through and we believe that not everything is a weapon system, right? Because I was shocked 6 months ago, I learned that GPS is considered a weapon systems, and so was SATCOM systems like WGS. To me, those are infrastructure. They're not weapon systems. And when you have weapon systems and you have to have people in uniform flying them and training on and learning them, it just brings a whole bunch of baggage with you. I mean, when we go out and lease fiber optic cables or we lease, commercial SATCOM, that's not a weapon system. But when we build it, it's a weapon system. So I never appreciated that culture coming from the intelligence community, but apparently that's there. But to me, that's something we have to rethink if we really want to take advantage of commercial space domain awareness capabilities, or buying SATCOM as a service, or even doing terrestrial uplink and downlink kinds of capabilities. So I think we really need to think that through. I also think that the future, probably not 5 years from now, but probably 15, 20 years from now, is going to be a lot of autonomy. You're not going to have people in uniform flying vehicles. You're going to be doing it autonomously. You're not going to be able to do it when Derek's launching 400 or 500 satellites across a couple of years. You just can't have people. So we have to really think through what is a weapon systems, what is infrastructure, and reserve, I think, our guardians for really flying the true things that are truly space superiority kind of weapon systems.
Right. Oh, I'm just actually happy to hear you say that, just since through the work I did with the Defense Science Board, I had the privilege of co-chairing the commercial space study with General Polakowski, and Carrie was a big part of that team as well, and that was a big underpinning of part of the limitation of really using commercial, was kind of that scope creep, if you will, in terms of what does the Space Force proper need to really own, control, and what have you. So that's a perfect pivot to kind of talk about mission areas and priorities. Since a big part of that too, in both the OSD and the Space Force commercial strategies, talked about missions and functions in those different ways. But then also, if we kind of step back and just look at just basic doctrine, you talk about combat arms, combat support, and combat services, and all three of those. And in combat arms, this is where the Space Force and Space Command seem to have kind of rightly prioritized in many ways, because space domain awareness and space warfighting is a top priority, and kind of an area that required the laser focus doctrinally to normalize some of this behavior. But then also, but that's where Space Command is the supported command, but for combat support, combat services, where Space Command is the supporting command, how does that element also get served by your team?
Right.
And how does that significant duality in then what you have to go both be prepared to operate and use, as well as then stress to him to acquire,
right.
How do you square that circle?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. General Whiting, I think it is several minutes after his change of command when he got all the commanders together, and I don't think that the previous commander of U.S. Space Command wasn't thinking this way, but he said, I want us to think about the fact that we are one of the combatant commands, and I think he might have said the only one, but I'm not positive, that is both a supported and a supporting command. And so now all the other geographic combatant commanders support each other, but the fact that we have that dual mission of doing that, just as you spelled out. So for me and our command, we have to think about that on a daily basis. That's one of the reasons, and there's people out there that said, hey, why do you have two operational centers? Why do you have a CSPOC and an NSDC, where other service components all have that in one, air operations center or a maritime operations center? And one of the reasons we do have two operations center is because of what you just said, and the scope of responsibility that they have to do. That doesn't mean that they're not both working together or both doing, working with each other in both those supporting and supporting. But that is one of the reasons that we did that. One of the other reasons is really a byproduct of an issue, which is classification levels. And so, having the IC with us at the NSDC and some of those higher level classification programs, which I know Honorable Calvelli is working to get down, but that allows us to do that. But we are working to bring more allies into that, as the allies, as Air Marshal Godfrey talked about, they get into this arena as well. We have to be able to talk to them. And so how we do that is we kind of bin our job into four areas. And the first is we must protect the joint warfighters from space-enabled attack. That's a nice way to say I got to be able to negate an adversary's ability to use space to find, fix, target, track, and execute an attack against our forces. And so when you talk about Admiral Paparo and PAC Fleet, and I think I said this recently, those ships now can be targeted from Hawaii, maybe even from the California coast right away. And so how can they continue to do their mission? Our air forces can be targeted, and obviously if we were to put ground forces in there too. So how can we negate their ability to use space-enabled capabilities to get after that? So we have to do that. We have to defend our own capabilities, and we have to defend our allies, and we could argue even commercial in there, especially as commercial provides us more services. We have to be able to protect that. So that really is in the supported. And we may need to call other combatant commands to help us with that, with different ways of doing that. And then we just can't forget that while all that is happening, we have to continue to deliver the combat relevant space effects that the warfighter needs today. And I want to give a hand to the acquisition community. They just demonstrated, I think yesterday, we have been harping on getting more GPS-3 satellites on orbit to be able to give us more M-code to be able to get after that. And through other reasons why we can do that, they executed that by getting that I think like a 45-day kind of thing to get it there so that we can get another GPS-3 into the fight. Because it's not just providing GPS to my mom, but it's which is really important.
It is important.
But providing GPS to the warfighter. Honorable Calvelli talked about satellite communications, space domain awareness, which we need to be able to do that, protect the fight. So we find ourselves in that supporting all the time. The last on that, how do we do that, is connect. And that's with connecting with our commercial partners and our allies. Air Marshal Godfrey talked about the Combined Space Operations Initiative and the CSPO partners. We now have more liaison officers at Vandenberg than we've ever had. I blame the general officers before me that they didn't put enough flagpoles in front of the new building. And so now I've got to figure out how to put more flagpoles out there because we're getting more countries that are with us. But we also have General Whiting is the multinational force commander for Operational Olympic Defender, and our component is the execution arm of that. And so now we've added France and Germany to that. And so we have to be able to connect with them through communications, through sharing space domain awareness and doing that. And then as we've talked already, my friends here have talked about, is our commercial integration cell. And thank you for being one of that. I think back to the opening days of the Ukraine where we had the attack on a commercial satellite. We knew all about that because we were together and we had the communications to be able to do that. And then you mentioned the joint commercial office to be able to do that. We recently had a breakup of a satellite that normally it would have taken us 48 hours to characterize and put out a message on spacetrack.org that we'd had a breakup because of these commercial. It was still not fast enough, but within a couple hours, I was already on. It always happens on a Saturday or Sunday. I was on the phone with the breakup.
Friday night.
But Friday night. So within about 6 hours, we had put out on spacetrack.org that there was, and that's responsible behavior on our behalf that we were trying to do. So it is a supporting thing that we have to think about all the time, but it is something that the Guardians out at Vandenberg do really, really well, and at all the other locations too.
That's all. So good question for the audience just in terms of partnering with NASA and with things like the Artemis program and other beyond geo activities. Just, do you have any thoughts in terms of priority? Where does this fall into your framework?
It's tough right now. I mean, if you think about what the Space Force has to do, it's quite impressive. They've got to take their traditional architecture and transform the hell out of it to be more resilient, right? That architecture was sort of a missile warning, MILSATCOM, space domain awareness was kind of built during the times when space was a benign environment, and we built launch was very expensive, so we built larger satellites and only a few of them, and put them mostly at GEO, except for GPS. And so we have got to proliferate the hell, disaggregate missions, build smaller and diversify orbits, right, to make that resilient. On top of doing all that, which we're doing today, we've got to do a whole set of protect and defend, right? A whole space superior mission to make sure that General Whiting, General Schiess, and others have the capabilities and tools they need, not only to enable the joint force and protect the joint force, but also protect U.S. assets in space. We're trying to do both those things at the same time. We definitely could use help for funding to do more. And if we had all the money in the world, we would consider looking at what's beyond cislunar or space access, mobility and logistics and things like that. We just don't have the funds to do the amazing amount of work we have to do for our current architecture and our space superior architecture, and then add on top of that these new mission areas. We need help.
I also think that that's a place where industry can help, because if you look at my business area in particular, I do the work for these gentlemen, but I also do the work for NASA. So I know what NASA's building and why, and there's applicability at times back into things that we need in other places as well. So when I was at NASA, I used to always tell the industry guys that came in, you know, you can integrate the government better than we can, right? And I think there is an opportunity there for us to to at least we know what they need, even if they don't have the resources, so that when we build for NASA or build for somebody else, we can play that back, right? We can kind of try to make it where it could be common at some point as we go forward. So I think that's an important role industry can play. All industry, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, I think the other thing I would add is, going back to, a comment that General Whiting makes frequently is that, as a geographic command, that the AOR for space is huge. So, 100 kilometers and up, right, into infinity. And so, one of the things I know that we spend a lot of time thinking about is we hear the demand signal around space domain awareness, and we hear about the integrated priority list of, enhanced battle space awareness for space warfare. We're thinking through, if there's a need to have, persistent orbital intelligence, right, where you're able to kind of sense everything everywhere. How do you get the right mix?
I want to sense everything everywhere.
Yes, there you go.
Okay.
There you go. Exactly. So how do we get the balance between, how, like, what role commercial can play and what is truly a government-specific, mission? And so I think as we think through how that ties into things like, where Space Futures Command, is going, and the types of analysis, that SWAC, would do, having insight into the threats kind of across all those orbital regimes, to then help industry, think through how it can complement, with the commercial service, what you would do with more of a kind of a bespoke with system. I think there's a lot of opportunity there to talk
If I could add too, and this gets back to what Honorable Calvelli was saying too, I get asked this all the time. Are you thinking about cislunar? Are you thinking about something else? I got so much to think about right in there that I can't, when you talk about General Whiting saying the kit that we have today is the kit we do. But I do think as we stand up Futures Command, that is an area where those things, emerging technologies, those things can come into that, and they can get, as General Saltzman said, go through the process. What are the con-ops? What are the possible ways to do that? So that can then feed in later so that we're not surprised. We obviously don't want to be surprised, but we have to focus on those protect and defend and are continuing to deliver our mission right now.
My 2 cents on the Futures Command as a really neat opportunity is a way we could formalize transition paths to allow the .mil PF part of it to catch up, to be ready to receive it. So I'm hopeful there. A question for you, Tony. So from your perspective, you kind of hit on this a little bit in your last answer, but what's working and not working in terms of commercial SDA being integrated into the seeing everything everywhere all the time? And where do you think commercial could even be further utilized?
I mean, one of the initiatives that's getting off the ground now is the Commercial Augmented Space Reserve, which I think will be another great way to formalize, how we both get fully integrated into the architecture, because today we through things like the JCO, we're able to have operators talk to operators to be able to tip and queue each other, but really we need to move to a machine-to-machine integration of our systems. And so really excited about what CASR is going to do to both facilitate that deeper integration, both of our data into operational systems, as well as being able to kind of receive commands, so C2, type integration. I also think that given the goal is to do exercise and war game integration now, during times of peace, so we're ready in times of conflict, I think those are all ways just to help with the maturation of the industry. In terms of how it can be better, I mean, I know there's a lot of people working really hard to kind of increase funding for commercial over time. We want to support that through demonstrating what's the art of the possible, and then helping quantify ways that we can augment the architecture. So I know as the budgets increase over time, we're hoping a greater percentage of that goes towards some of these emerging services. but understand how these processes work.
So kind of a question to kind of weave from the partnerships panel, and then the panel at the end of the day is about people and our workforce. So whoever would like to jump ball and take this one first, but how have each of you shifted the perspective of the acquisition community and the operations community to accomplish your priority? And what do you need in the work? What are your gaps? What are your big needs in terms of where are you getting the talent or not getting the talent that you really need to meet your mission?
I'll start. I need experience. I need deep technical acquisition mission experience. I don't need generalists. And I think, I would say to the next generation of folks rising up through the ranks, the cadets and others that are going to be running the Space Force someday, make sure that you have deep technical experience in one area, right? Whether that's operations, whether that's acquisition, or whether that's cyber, or that's intel. But you need to have that deep technical base as a foundation. And then you could generalize across other things, but don't be a generalist your whole career. You're not going to end up leading at that point.
Yeah, I would say, it's really interesting where we're going with our officer training right now, and I think it is going to give us incredible benefits in the future. We got to just stay the course. And so to Honorable Calvelli's point, I grew up, started out as a missileer and then space operations, but then it was like, hey, let's touch every space operations career field that you can. Let's get a little launch on you, a little satellite telemetry. Let's do a little missile warning. Let's do this. And then when you add in, and I normally talk about the threat, and I'm shooting myself that I didn't talk about the threat today, but our intel threat based and our cyber and all of that, and then you add on our ability with acquisition and engineers. I think the fact that we're going to lay that foundation in your first year as a lieutenant, and then we're going to have you go do something, and then as Honorable Calvelli said, you've got that foundation, and then you can be more specific in the things that you're doing. You still may do a little bit of overlap, but that'll make better acquirers, better operators, better intel, and better cyber folks. And so I think that is really going to do us well. And then as we continue to look at our civilians and our enlisted, we've got to do the next steps there. And so for our enlisted, really making them the technicians, and how do we use them so that then they become the NCOs and the chief master sergeants that we need in the future. So I think we're on the cusp, and we just need to continue. One of the things that wouldn't have happened if there wasn't a Space Force, because we would have continued to do the way we had done Air Force training, and it would have been this one way. And now we can decide how to do this ourselves. And so I think it's a really good future there for young folks.
So there's a question.
I think from an industry perspective,
Yep.
I don't really have any trouble getting the talent, but I have to change the way we engage that talent, especially the earlier career folks. One of the things, and this may sound a little off of what these guys were talking about, but I've actually had to change the way we outfit the skiffs. So I grew up in a time when the skiffs were supposed to be ugly, dank, awful. That's the way it was, right? That's the way your life was. We've done some things with the customers. The customers have really helped us out in changing some of the rules, simple things, paint, lights.
Windows.
We hooked up, we actually got agreement to hook up some screens that have cameras tied into the security, so it is like a window.
Yeah.
You can see what's happening in the parking lot. And I know that sounds kind of pedantic, but you'd be surprised. We got a generation that lives and dies by their phone, and they can't take that phone into the skiff. And they get the DTs about an hour in. Somebody's texting me. So I think that's part of we're having to adapt so that we keep that workforce, because it's hard. We tried to make the skiff FOMO, right? Fear of missing out. So we put like coffee in there and things. It's just it's stuff like that. But we're having to adapt from what I'll consider my generation to the next generation coming in. It's not that they're not interested in the mission. It's not that they're not excited about it. But they have things that they've gotten used to, and I think, again, no problem recruiting them. But sometimes once you put them in that skiff, if you don't have something more modern than what we're used to, that's been a big adjustment. But we have to get the customers have been fantastic helping us, because they know they got the same challenges as we go forward.
So note, lesson learned from Lockheed: put the good coffee in the skiff.
There you go.
Right. Got it.
Everybody needs to know that the good coffee at Lockheed's in the skiff.
Right.
So apply for those jobs.
A question for you, Honorable Calvelli. What was a lesson learned from the NRO that you took with you into this job that you think is still ringing true now?
It's all about delivering on cost and schedule. It really is. I mean, that is the NRO's bread and butter, is defining an executable acquisition strategy, putting it under contract, and delivering the program and delivering for the mission. So, I mean, that's clearly the one thing that I'm bringing from the NRO here is that culture of programmatic discipline and execution.
And I think we are at time, so I have to have my one fun question for everybody. Whoever wants to go first. What's your favorite space movie and why? Don't all jump at once.
So I'll go ahead. I like The Martian.
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah,
Okay.
keep mine.
That's
Yeah.
my favorite. And I'll tell you why. So when I was at NASA, we had built the architecture, and the only thing I didn't like about that movie was that architecture was already built and on Mars when the movie started, and I'm like, that's not fair. I think it's a good movie.
It's a case study in problem solving, right? So,
Yeah.
yeah, that's great.
I think go ahead.
Doug. I love the movie Alien. I don't know how you can't. And I just remember when my son was born, when we brought him home from the hospital, second night, and Alien was on all night long on TBS, and we were up all night with them, and we watched Alien about 7 times.
So you knocked
So
down.
Alien makes me think of my oldest, my son.
That is awesome.
I think for me, I don't know if it's a movie per se, but Battlestar Galactica and that, and then just recently, not the whole storyline, but kind of to what Robert just said, the TV series For All Mankind, because just how far out there, they're mining stuff on an asteroid, and so just where could we go in the space arena? So.
Tony,
I'd said the Martian.
you're doubling down on the
double
Martian?
down. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to have to go with, since we haven't made a football reference,
Okay.
I'm not going to. But instead, so 2001, I mean, I think it's just super awesome and thought-provoking. And Carrie will appreciate this, but she and I were MIT alum, so we don't really worry about football. But
They don't have a team? I don't understand.
they do. It's just not televised. But no, when Hal was commissioned, was actually when the real date of his Hal's activation was during my freshman year at MIT. So I'm admitting how old I am. And so they had a little party, and we had a cake, and we sang Daisy, and it was very MIT nerdy. It was wonderful. Thank you all very much for spending the time, and this was absolutely an honor to be able to be on stage with all of you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mandy.
Thank you.
Great job.
Hilarious.
Thanks.
Doubling down on the Martian.